Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here today with everybody. And sorry, we are having some technical difficulties that aren't allowing me to have the video on. And I got all dressed up for the occasion. Thought that I'd actually wear a suit and tie, and no video. Either way, I want to apologize for that. I'm happy to be with you today. Uh, we will have the opportunity to ask questions, so you have the raise your hand button. You can submit written questions. We like the oral questions. We will have Marnie Fredrickson, who is our Assistant Chief Deputy Auditor, on to help with the technical issues. And we'll kind of convert this to the Ask the Marnie program here in just a little bit. I do want to thank you for the work you're doing, educating our kids. As most of you know, or some of you know, my wife works in education. I know this has been a stressful time for everyone, but especially for our educators and school administrators. These teleconferences are a great way for us to share best practices and to keep in communication with your peers. We've been hosting calls with our partners and clients all across Ohio, and I'm happy to be here with you today so that we can get some facts and get some discussion going. If you have a question at any time, please raise your hand. Make sure you hit the hand function, and we'll get to you in just a minute here. I'll start a little bit with what we're doing. We are predominantly working remotely in our office, as many of our staff has done for years. It seems to be going smoothly. I'm proud of our staff for adapting to the situation. Our productivity numbers, our completed audits have all been up, and everything seems to be working okay on our end. And we know that only happens with the cooperation that we receive from all of you. And so please remember that our people are trying to respond to COVID too. And so when they ask you to pull documents and set them in a room, please do that if you're able. I think we're able to do things pretty efficiently and still moving on. We are prepared and ready to assist our clients in navigating a changing environment. We will be flexible when it comes to our duty to audit, and will take into account the guidance that existed at the time the decisions were made about services and operations. For example, we know that the guidance, particularly on CARES Act money, has been ever changing. And so please document. Allow us to help us help you by having good records as to what you did and when you did it. And when possible, make sure you have clear legislative authority for all of your expenditures that you're doing. It's real tough. There are certain things that you need legislative authority, so we just recommend that you have a good, strong practice at getting that all the time. How can we help? Well, we're offering our expertise in these forums as one way to help us assist our partners, to help give you our best practices and to give you guidance where we can. While we can't provide a roadmap dealing with each and every unique case, we encourage you to work locally with the help of legal counsel and elected officials. We find it beneficial to share financial pitfalls that could occur to create opportunities for budget officials from all over the state to share their concerns and solutions. We will serve as that bulletin board for those type of activities. We created a COVID resource page on our website that houses a lot of great information, such as guidance and policy changes our office has distributed, federal assistance, guidance from federal authorities and the like, frequently asked question pages there, as well as much more. Hopefully everything there will be of help to you. Additionally, for those having dramatic financial hardships, we always want you to reach out to our local government services team for assistance. We might even be financially able to help with some of that, but if you think you're heading into fiscal distress or fiscal emergency, get to us early and let us do what we can to help alleviate where we can help. What does this mean to schools? Well, some significant new COVID-19 programs are available to schools that include the CRF subgrants, the Corona Relief Fund, ODE, OBM, CRF allocations were made. The main allocations were made to city, local, exempted village school districts, joint vocational school districts, community schools, independent STEM schools, county boards of developmental disabilities, and non-public schools. The ODE CRF Broadband Ohio Connectivity Grant is available to schools and ESCs to provide hotspots and internet-enabled services to students for purchases made between, key dates here, July 1st and December 30th. The Ohio Department of Higher Education CRF program made available to college, universities, and school districts with adult education programs. All CRF programs allocations must meet these three prongs. Now remember these three prongs, and everything you're spending this money on has to meet these prongs. Let's go through them. One, are the necessary expenditures incurred due to a public health emergency with respect to COVID-19? Simply put, was it COVID related? 2, were they not accounted for in the budget most recently approved as of March 27, 2020? And 3, were they incurred during the period that begins on March 1st, 2020 and ends December 30th, 2020? July 1st, 2020 for the broadband grant. So effectively, it has to be COVID related. It couldn't have been in your prior budget, and it has to be spent between March 1st and December 30th. Here are some other funds that are going to be out there. The Elementary and Secondary School Relief Fund, the ESSER. It's administered by ODE. It provides emergency relief grants to school districts related to COVID-19 pandemics. It has fairly broad uses. It may be used for allowable expenses from March 13th, 2020 to September 30th, 2022. Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund is another program that's administered by ODE. Its funding is flowing in October to county boards of DD, ESCs, and the Ohio Schools for the Blind and Deaf. Governor DeWine has adopted the same allowable uses as in the ESSER and for the GEER program. And so the governor determines the allowable uses, and those are the ones he's determined. The Ohio Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund is another fund. It's called HERF. It's administered directly by the U.S. Department of Education, and it's available to Title IV participating career centers, JVS districts, and others that receive student financial assistance clusters. The Seamless Summer, the summer food COVID-19 programs. It is administered by the ODE. Schools must file an application. It permits eligible schools with at least 50% of students on free or reduced lunches, or who receive notice of eligibility from ODGF, ODE, high unemployment rates for their districts, to provide free meals to all students. Some districts are also working with local food banks to provide meal packs that are not federally funded. Treasurers should work with their food service coordinators to understand the federal programs a district is receiving and whether they include COVID-19 funding. The ODE will also be providing assistance to schools soon on how to identify COVID-19 assistance in all federal programs, including the nutrition cluster. Be alert. Negative adjustments on ODE distribution transaction lists indicate that ODE reclassifying eligible charges from non-COVID federal programs to a COVID-19 program. Schools opting to use their federal COVID-19 programs received in July or later to reimburse eligible expenses incurred in fiscal year 2020 may still need to report the underlying expenses on their fiscal year 2020 federal schedules. For those schools that prepare their federal schedule on a cash basis accounting, most do, or the Uniform Guidance Act requires expenditures be recognized in the fiscal year when the underlying activity or expenditure occurs. For this reason, it is critical that schools identify these reimbursements as soon as possible and keep an open channel of communication with their auditors. These decisions will impact the federal schedule reporting and the auditor major program determinations for fiscal year 2020 single audit. Again, we encourage schools to take full advantage of the opportunity to recoup these costs. We just want to remind schools to communicate often with their auditors to avoid inefficiencies in their single audits. Also, schools that have not traditionally qualified for a single audit should be mindful that the threshold for qualifying for a single audit is $750,000 in total federal expenditures. The emphasis is on spending, regardless of when the federal funding was received. Be sure to let your auditor know if you think you will be near this threshold for your 2020 audit. All schools receive these new federal programs. Keep in mind that separate accountability rules will apply. Schools should allow the USAS New Fund Accounting Guidance on AOS COVID-19 webpage for establishing new funds and reclassifying expenditures from original funds to the new CARES Act funds. So when you're doing reclassifications, please use the AOS COVID-19 webpage for guidance. Additionally, COVID-19 federal assistance will need to be reported on the federal schedule separately from non-COVID related assistance in any pre-existing federal programs. The federal OMB initially extended the single audit due date, but then rescinded this extension for certain fiscal years. Schools with fiscal years ending June 30th, 2020 must submit their single audits to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse by March 31st, 2021. There is no extension currently for this for school districts. We are told that OBM has no current plans to provide further single audit due date extensions. The federal OMB is expected to issue compliance supplements, which includes single audit guidance for auditors. While it will provide some information on federal schedule reporting guidance, the federal OBM will not provide program-specific COVID-19 compliance guidance until November as part of a separate addendum. We've asked for it to come out sooner, but they said it will be here in November. Keep an eye on the AOS COVID-19 webpage for developing guidance on these issues. We continue to update the page regularly with new information. Due to the lateness of the federal guidance on the audit to the audit community, the AOS and other state auditors and IPAs are actively advocating for federal OB to provide an additional single audit filing extension for fiscal 2020 school single audits. However, at this point, it's unclear whether they're going to grant this extension. You also should check out the GASB emergency toolkit on our website for guidance on GAAP accruals and disclosures related to COVID-19. Now that I've just covered that little bit of information, I do want to remind everybody, if you didn't catch that, because I went through it relatively fast, we are recording this call and it will be available on our YouTube page. Any questions that we don't get to, we will also post responses and try and get you those responses as soon as possible. Your regional reps should also be distributing this conference YouTube. I want to give a shout out to Jake, Tori, and Lori who are on the line, and now encourage you to raise your hand if you have a question. Please raise your hand. I like to put people on live, and I'll just ask what school district you're from. It does make these calls go a little faster. Dawn Jacobs has the first question. It's a write-in. Do you have a listing of all COVID funding and their spending deadlines, maybe as a one-pager as a reference? Well, I want to again now recognize Marnie Fredrickson. Marnie is our Assistant Chief Deputy Auditor. Marnie does a lot of things for us. She's one of our rock stars, but more importantly, she's heading up our COVID compliance unit and has been answering most of our COVID questions. And so she's our expert. So let me go ahead and just recognize Marnie. Marnie, how you doing?
Good morning, Auditor. Well, thank you. And to respond to this question, we do have a tracking spreadsheet available on our COVID-19 resources webpage. It's called the Federal Funding Tracker Spreadsheet for COVID-19, and it will list the programs we've identified coming into Ohio and any information about those programs in terms of period of availability, eligibility for funding, who might receive those programs. That spreadsheet will probably include some of the information that they are asking for here.
Awesome. All right, our next question, next person to raise their hand is Bill Nye. Bill, go ahead and unmute, you're on the call. Bill, you need to undo your mute, you're good. Come on and join us. Mute button. Bill, your mute button's there on the tab. Just go ahead and unmute that and join the call. All right, we'll come back to Bill. Other questions? Go ahead, and if you want to ask a question, hit the raise your hand button and we'll get you right on the call. Remember, the CARES Act funding is the only for expenditures during the pandemic period. So products that have a shelf life longer than 1 year, we're responsible for the prorated costs. How does that work for products like laptops or dividers that clearly have shelf lives that have outlived the pandemic? Marnie, what are we doing on this, things that live longer than a year?
The life of the asset is not the determining factor as far as whether or not you can charge it to the program. So even if a laptop, for example, does live longer than a year, if a laptop purchase was necessary due to the pandemic, it can be permissible depending upon the federal program that you're looking at, as long as, again, you have to evaluate the criteria of each program separately. You want to make sure it's allowable with the program that you want to charge it to, and that you receive that equipment within any specified time period. So with Coronavirus Relief Fund money, we know we are up against a window here that is closing on December 30th. So you'd want to make sure you do receive that equipment prior to December 30th in order for it to be permissible within that program. It could not have been budgeted if it was coronavirus relief fund. And you do want to track it as a federally acquired asset. It's unclear whether or not the U.S. Department of Treasury is going to expect local governments to treat assets purchased with coronavirus relief fund money as federally required assets that have to be tracked separately, and in the event that they are disposed of, that you would need to comply with the Uniform Guidance Act on how to dispose of that equipment. But we anticipate that they will. So we're advising everyone you should follow your same procedures that you would in any other federal program scenario for acquiring assets, with these assets as well, and track them in your inventory system.
Marnie, that's for hardware and assets. What is there a special rule for software and subscription type things like that?
Yeah, the rules can vary. With software, it depends on what you're purchasing, what the terms and conditions are. If you're buying a software product that you're going to have in hand by December 30th, it's a software that's necessary for some reason due to COVID. It wasn't budgeted. You want to charge it to the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and you will have it purchased and licensed to it by December 30th. There could be an opportunity to charge that software purchase to the program. If, on the other hand, you're purchasing an internet subscription, and the internet subscription, for example, spans beyond December 30th, if you're trying to charge the Coronavirus Relief Fund, you would only be able to charge the portion of the subscription that you've actually received before December 30th. So we have 3 months remaining in the year. We could potentially charge 3 months of that subscription to the program. As long as the services were rendered, we've been using that software under the subscription, but we would not be able to charge anything from 2021 to the Coronavirus Relief Fund program because of the termination of the program on December 30th.
Thank you, Marnie. Doug Beeman has a write-in question, and this is one that we really, this is something that we have been concerned about. Student attendance audits. The AOS staff review of student attendance is part of the fiscal audit. That's correct. We also do other random attendance audits. We have that capability, and in the past have been doing those. We have been advised by AOS staff that you will not review attendance from March to June of fiscal year 2020. That's when the original shutdown happened. We are hoping for guidance will be provided on how to track and document attendance for 2021 for students in remote learning. In addition, what about students that were in the building and have been quarantined by our local health department and may be still participating in virtually? Marnie, I'm going to kick this to you in just a second. Our position is pretty clear. School districts are required, both with charter and regular traditional schools, are required to have a program monitoring student attendance. The new statute basically says for students in traditional schools, you're not going to have a funding adjustment necessarily for that, but you are still required to track them. And so we want to see when we go in and do the audits that you have a student tracking process and that you're utilizing it and that it is subject for us to verify. We may be doing some other student attendance tracking. And the real question is, how are we going to do this remotely? As long as you have policies and procedures, the Department of Education has issued a number of guidances with regard to how to do that, and whether it's completion of projects, allocating time for projects, all of those things are out there. Marnie, what have I left out here?
No, Auditor, you're exactly right. We've taken the viewpoint that in fiscal school year 2020, again, for maximum flexibility, we're going to minimize the amount of student attendance testing that we perform over those last 3 months of the school year. We'll still look at student attendance for the remainder of the year where we were operating normally, but we'll reduce and scale back those last 3 months in recognition that everybody had to adjust fairly quickly overnight to the changing environment. However, that said, while we might not be looking at those items specifically for the last 3 months, you were still required to follow those laws and should keep them in the forefront of your mind, particularly going into 2021. We would anticipate doing more robust audit procedures over student attendance again and resuming to more of our normal audit process over 2021.
Yeah, just to make sure we're clear on that, look, we're going to give you flexibility for the last 3 months of 2020 because we all know that everybody was adjusting to something that's new. But the attendance requirements are still there, and we want to see processes and procedures in place, particularly on the traditional school virtual side of the house, that you have processes and procedures to make sure those kids are getting education. And so that's where we're at on that. Todd Hopkins has a write-in. Can ESSER funds be used to offset the salaries and benefits of teaching staff? Marnie, what say you?
Well, that's a broad question, and I would say generally the answer is yes. There's a fairly broad uses permitted with ESSER money. So there's a list of 12 items. If you go to the document library within the CCIP on ODE's website, you'll find the list available to you there of what the allowable uses are. They are fairly broad. They can encompass some teacher salaries as well.
All right, but they're going to have to be limited to COVID type activities, right? It just can't be generally salary replacement. Am I right on that one?
Not exactly, Auditor. On that one with ESSER, it is considered by U.S. Department of Education to be a stabilization program. So this is an exception. The Coronavirus Relief Fund would certainly have some limitations on its use, but with ESSER being a stabilization fund and the format of the way that the U.S. Department developed that program, there will be more of an opportunity to use it for revenue replacement.
All right, I want to remind everybody to raise your hand if you have a question. We'd like to get you live on the call. We just ask you to identify which school district you're from, and allows us to keep track and to get back to you if you ask the stump the auditor or stump Marnie kind of question that we need to research. So our next writing questions from Kathy Fruchet. We're currently conducting an in-person instruction. Awesome. If we purchase teacher computers to be available in the event that we move to a hybrid or virtual instructional setting, can we still charge the computers to the grant? My suspicion, the answer is yes. Marnie, am I right?
That's a good question, and this is an important conversation to have with the schools. Unlike our cities and counties, schools have a broader variety of brand new programs available to them under the CARES Act. We have the Coronavirus Relief Fund, we have ESSER, we have other resources available to you, and even your existing federal programs are in some cases receiving an influx of COVID-19 funding. And so to answer your question, can you charge computers to the grant? The first question you'd have to ask yourself is, which grant do I want to charge them to? Do I need to comply with any state bidding laws? And with schools, the state bidding laws are really pretty forgiving for schools. There's a lot of opportunity to just go ahead and make a purchase without having to competitively bid. However, if I'm looking to charge a grant program to which federal procurement rules apply, there are more stringent requirements around ESSER, for example. You do have to comply with federal procurement rules with ESSER. And so you'd have to be real careful that you're evaluating that as you're making decisions about what grant you want to charge. Are they a permissible purpose under the grant? And do you need to comply with any federal procurement rules in purchasing those computers in order to charge the grant? So for ESSER, procurement rules do apply. For the Coronavirus Relief Fund, U.S. Treasury has indicated so far to us that the procurement rules are not applicable. So there might be more of an opportunity to charge equipment purchases like this to the Coronavirus Relief Fund if you did not undergo competitive bidding, but you still need to make sure you're complying with any state laws that might apply to a purchase. And if you were to use the Coronavirus Relief Fund, you need to make sure you are complying with those 3 prongs. The computers had to be a necessary purchase for COVID-19. They could not have been budgeted prior to March 27th. And you need to have the computers delivered and in hand by December 30th. Even if you don't pay the bill until after that date, it's important that the goods are received by December 30th.
Awesome. If you want to ask a question, please raise your hand on the, oh, you think teachers and school folks would get the raise your hand part. On the bar, you can just raise your hand and we'll get to you. I'd love to have you there live, but I am going to call on somebody. I know that he's there. David Varda. David, you're on the line. David's an auditor of state alumni, very familiar with our office operations. Just want to say hi to you, David. Are you out there?
Hi there. How are you?
How you doing?
I'm doing really good. I'm up here in Mount Vernon, Ohio. I helping Knox County out, Knox ESC as their interim treasurer. So just sitting here listening to you. So
Any
didn't have
questions?
enough to do, so I had to add another county.
There's not any issues in Mount Vernon, I know, right? Everything's good. What can we do
No,
for you? What questions are you hearing from your colleagues and your superintendents out there that other than go ahead.
I think most of those have been covered. I think everybody's trying to use all the pots of money most efficiently and effectively within the rules that they are. And so I think a lot of us, like we're managing a grant where we're actually getting money from Franklin County and Columbus, but it's being used for our students to get them hotspots so they can access. So
Awesome.
I think there's a lot of exciting stuff going on, and it's we're blessed that the federal government was able to give us the monies to be able to do that.
Yep. Awesome. Well, keep doing what you're doing. Look, we got to keep educating kids. I've got two. I've got a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old that fortunately are in everyday in-person instruction. And so we want to make sure that they're getting the quality education that we know Ohio schools deliver every day. We had Todd Hopkins. Todd's raised his hand. Todd, go ahead and unmute. You're on the call.
Thank you, Auditor. First off, I appreciate you and your staff taking the time to have this today and answer some of the questions.
Thanks, Todd. Where are you from, Todd?
I'm up at Westlake City Schools. I met you a couple weeks ago when you were here.
Yeah, thanks. We were just up there.
Yep.
I think you're one of those. You're one of those distinction guys, aren't you?
We are. We appreciate the award from the auditor's office. We try hard to be in compliance and for our community. And with that, along those lines, with my question specific to the CRF funds, I know that you had mentioned, and it's been stated in the allowable uses, that you can't have budgeted for it in your previous budget. So my question would be, is obviously we're buying a lot more cleaner and different types of cleaning products that we normally would have never bought. Do we have to account for the expenditures of the old type of cleaner that we may have bought under the old budget?
I'm going to kick this one to Marnie. My gut tells me that if you had allocated $10 for cleaners and you spent $15, that delta is going to be your differential. But I don't know if your budget's that specific. But Marnie, what is the rule under CARES Act? The three prongs are going to have to be met, I would think.
Yes, you're exactly right, Auditor. And in that example, it would be that $5 differential that is over and above what you had budgeted for cleaning that we know you could comfortably charge to the program. I think you would be on shaky territory to try to charge anything that was within the budget but is just a different type of cleaning product. I don't think U.S. Treasury would accept that, but they have indicated they would accept anything that would exceed what you budgeted for cleaning supplies.
And that's going to be not just cleaning supplies, but I think they can also safely charge masks because they weren't buying masks before. They can probably safely charge, the plastic screens that are going to be there because those weren't things there. All those kind of things could also be charged, I would think.
Yes.
And if they had to add an extra janitor to do extra cleaning, that certainly would be an additional charge that could be charged.
Yes, there would be some opportunity to charge an additional janitor, maybe not his entire salary, but at least on an hour per hour basis for anything that he's doing that's above and beyond the normal cleaning duties.
And if you can charge his salary, you can probably also charge his benefits for that time period, right?
Yes, again, on a pro rata basis as supported by his hour for hour charges, I would say yes.
Good. Thank you for that, Todd. Thanks for the question. Hopefully we got it answered. By the way, just as a reminder, we are recording this call and all of our questions will be on our frequently asked questions sites. The call will be on our YouTube page. And if you have calls after the call, please get them to one of our customer service reps, and we will try to get you a personalized answer where we can. Our next question is from Trevor. Trevor writes in and says, we set up a single line item for all COVID-related supplies for it as the COVID-19 specific PPE and other needed items. Is it permissible to have those reimbursed to the general fund? Two questions come to mind here with this question. One, Marty, what do they need to do for accounting in special purpose lines for COVID or other grant type funds? And two, if they did advance spending for reimbursement, if those expenditures came out of their general fund, can they reimburse the general fund?
Sure, auditor. So again, as you're evaluating whether or not there's an opportunity to charge the programs, again, it's helpful to us to know which program you're looking at charging. My assumption is you're looking at the Coronavirus Relief Fund. So before you make the decision of whether or not you could charge the costs of these cleaning supplies or COVID-19 related supplies that you've already charged to your general fund, you'd want to make sure that you've evaluated the second prong, which is, were they in the budget by March 27th? If they were, you might not be able to do it. If they were not a part of your budget, there is an opportunity to have your general fund reimbursed. We have guidance for schools available on our COVID-19 webpage that explains the steps the school would need to follow in order to reimburse any expenditures that the general fund or other funds have already made that could be allowably covered by one of these COVID-19 brand new programs that have been created by the CARES Act. But yes, you can go ahead and reimburse that if it meets the allowable cost and other provisions of the program.
Awesome. Other questions, please raise your hand. We've got time for a couple more before we have to start wrapping up here. And right now we don't have anybody in the queue. Oh, we got one. There we go. Ryan Lockwood. Ryan, go ahead and unmute. You're on the call.
Hello, sir. I'm Ryan Lockwood at Springfield Local Schools in Holland, Ohio by Toledo. My question is about being a subrecipient of a CARES Act grant from our local township. Can you speak to what I should be aware of if I accept this grant from them?
Thanks, Ryan. Barney, go ahead and discuss though. Subrecipient means that they're the primary grantor from the state and they're going to be the one managing it. You just have to meet the terms and conditions of the grant and have to be able to provide them information for it to be reviewed. Marnie, go ahead and what did I miss on that?
Correct. So in this scenario, the township is becoming a pass-through entity, taking on additional responsibility for overseeing the purchases that your school district is making for allowability with the program. As a subrecipient of the township would be responsible for communicating all of the compliance requirements to you, including any reporting. You would need to make available to the township your records for audit, as well as to auditors in general that might need to take a look at the records for compliance. But again, the terms and conditions of all of that should be part of a subaward agreement that was created between the township and the school. And the overarching guidance behind all of this would be rooted within the Uniform Guidance Act. Which is at 2 CFR 200. So it's Title II CFR 200 Uniform Guidance Act. And there are provisions within there that speak to the responsibilities of both the pass-through entity, which would be the township in this case, as well as the subrecipient, which would be the school.
Ryan, did that answer your question?
It did, sir. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I think it's great that the local governments are trying to share some of this money to get it out and to get it into your hands to do some good. Bill Blakely is next on the call. Bill, go ahead and unmute. You're on the call.
Thank you. Good afternoon, I guess I can say now. Thanks for taking my questions and being with us. I'm with Edgerton Local School District up in Northwest Ohio, and just want to get some clarification looping back around to useful life on that question or item that came up. So my understanding of the federal laws as far as an asset is concerned is it would be anything greater than $5,000. And so my understanding would be that we would be okay with those items that would be less than the $5,000 as long as our local policy stated the same. Am I missing something on that?
That is the key, Bill. The last part of the statement that you just made there, the federal rules do set a threshold of $5,000, but they also go on to say, or whatever local threshold the governing board has set for capital asset purchases in general. So it would be whatever capitalization threshold you have by policy that you use within your school district that you would defer to in terms of whether or not you need to treat this as a federally purchased asset.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarification. I think that's a big piece that a lot of us treasurers are concerned about and definitely want to make sure that we're doing right because it could definitely cause us some issues going forward.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Nicole Spriggs, you're next on the call. Go ahead and unmute and welcome to the call. Let us know what school district you're from. Nicole, are you there? Nicole, I think you're unmuted. Go ahead and join us. All right, we'll come back to Nicole. Our next caller is Jeff Bartholomew. Jeff writes in, piggybacking on the CARES Act subrecipient grant from a township. Would that need to be used for one of the 12 acceptable uses of ESSER? My suspicion is no, because it's a CARES Act. But Marnie, what say you?
Auditor, you're exactly right. With the example that was provided earlier with the grant from the township going to the school, that would be for the Coronavirus Relief Fund that's administered by the U.S. Department of Treasury. Those requirements are different than the requirements of ESSER, which is administered by the U.S. Department of Education. So everybody thinks of all of these programs as being CARES Act programs, but they are very different in terms of their allowable uses, their period of availability. So it's really important to identify which program it is specifically that you're looking at and make sure then that you're going to the provisions of that program, the terms and conditions and what is allowable for that specific program. But Coronavirus Relief Fund is different from ESSER and from GEAR.
Thank you. Our next caller is Christine Ziegler. Christine, go ahead and unmute and please let us know what school district you're with.
Good afternoon. Christine Ziegler from Archbold Area Local in Fulton County. And my question is in regard to the FERs for the grants that expire on December 30th. What is the timeline for treasurers to submit those FERs?
Marnie, did you get that one?
I got that one. So for the final expenditure report, I'm going to have to defer to ODE and follow up with them on that. ODE is not administering the Coronavirus Relief Fund program, so I'm not certain whether or not they have any intention of requiring the final expenditure report for that program. They are involved, but jointly with OBM. So although they've set it up in the CCIP, it may not apply to all the traditional requirements that we normally see with other education programs. So that is one I will make note of, and we'll follow up with ODE and see if we can get you an answer on that.
Thank you.
Sure.
It's great to have so much participation from Northwest Ohio. Nicole Spriggs has written in her message, we received a mini grant CARES grant from the State Library of Ohio. Should it be coded as a 400 or 500 fund? Marnie?
The key to that question is going to be whether or not the state library used its Coronavirus Relief Fund or other federal programs as the source of that grant. So you'd want to follow up with the state library and ask the question What is the source of the funding? If it is federally funded with Coronavirus Relief Fund, for example, we know the state library did receive an allocation for that money, then you would code it as a 500 fund, 599. If it is in fact state money, then it would be a 400 fund.
Awesome. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. We are coming to the end of our time that was allocated for this. I do want to take one more minute to encourage everybody to visit our website, ohioauditor.gov, and right on the homepage, you'll see a link for our COVID resource page. As I've mentioned a number of times, there's a lot of good information there, from everything from funding to open meeting guidance. I hope you'll know that moving forward, if we can provide assistance, please contact and reach out to our customer service reps. They're there to help you. If you have a specific question on a CARES Act or other funding, get it to them. They'll get it to one of our people to get you a response that you can rely on. Marnie is out there, and James Coyne and our other folks can certainly get to her from our liaisons. If you have an email, you can certainly email your question directly to jmcoyne, JMCOYNE, jmcoyne@ohioauditor.gov, and you will get a written response back to your question as soon as we can get it answered. We want to make sure that we're here to help. That's one of our customer service that we're trying to offer. And certainly we want common sense compliance. We want you to document everything, and we want you to use your legislative body to approve things to help us help you. So with that, thank you all for your time. Stay safe. Thanks for the work you're doing to educate my kids and all of the children of Ohio. God bless you, and stay safe.